Oh, the Creative Learning Exchange. Okay. Then a lot of this will be familiar to you, Ryan. Some new.
Okay, I see that it is 7 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. We are broadcasting from New England, where we have Patriots fever, but we are totally encased in snow with more on its way. So we have the wonderful Super Bowl to look forward to, and fortunately we don't have to travel. We have our TVs close by, I guess, because the roads might be treacherous again this weekend.
Oh boy.
Yeah, that's what I hear. Um, the presenter this evening is Linda Booth Sweeney. I'm Carolyn Jacobs with WGBH Education. You might be familiar with WGBH if you're in the New England area, or if you are fans of Nova or American Experience or Frontline or whatever. Those are all of our programs that we produce in Boston. And we have a very large and active education department where we create lots of educational resources, and almost without exception, we give everything away. We're publicly funded, foundation funded, and we produce things and we like to give them to teachers. Linda Booth Sweeney, again, our presenter for this webinar, Becoming Systems Literate. Linda is an author, researcher, and innovator who has been working in the field of systems education for over 20 years. She was the content advisor on the WGBH Systems Literacy Collection, which you'll learn more about this evening, and which has now launched on the platform called PBS LearningMedia. When Linda is not raising her 3 kids, she splits her time between Gaining Ground, which is a nonprofit farm dedicated to Hungary Leaf in Concord, Massachusetts. She's a consultant also, and she is a writer for children's books. Her first picture book, entitled When the Wind Blows, is coming out in February. And she's also finishing up a children's biography on one of her favorite systems thinkers, Buckminster Fuller. So welcome, Linda.
Thank you.
I wanted
I'm
to
very
mention,
excited to be here.
I am happy to have you. We are all happy to have you. I just wanted to mention that WGBH is a partner with PBS in the development and the production of PBS LearningMedia. And that is the platform that you will see is where you can find lots of the resources that Linda is going to be referring to this evening. So Linda is going to take us through systems literacy, what it is, why it's relevant, how it relates to the standards. She's going to showcase some of the systems literacy resources that are part of the collection that I mentioned. There will be ample time for questions, and also we'll lead you to some additional resources at the end. A couple of housekeeping things. We are recording the session this evening. We will be sending everyone who registered for tonight's presentation the recording link. You don't have to have registered to view it, so we invite you to send it out through your social media channels and help us spread the word about what these resources are all about. And we're going to get started, first of all, with a couple of quick polling questions so we get to know a little bit more about who's in the room. We had, as is always the case, we have lots of people who register for these presentations but are not able to join because of time and etc. We had people register from Istanbul, Israel, Oregon, Arizona, Canada, California, Massachusetts, all over. And you told us in the registration questions, some of you are teachers, some of you are PhD students, directors of nonprofits, consultants, authors, etc. So we have a very diverse crowd. But we'd like to get to know and help you see who is in the room now. So I'm going to open up 3 quick polls, and you should see them on your screen here. And if you would let us know what your professional role is in the first one, what subjects you teach, if in fact you're a teacher, and then just let us know about your familiarity with systems literacy. Yeah, and the category of other you can see is the vast majority of you. So if you want to identify what other is in the chat box, that would be great just to give your colleagues an idea of who you are. Linda and I are the only ones who have the microphone this evening, so we ask you to ask questions or interact with each other through the chat box. And other is the winner of the second one also. And we have some teachers about systems literacy in the room. Great. Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Linda, and go ahead. We're sounding you loud and clear, Linda.
Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. I'm delighted that you all joining us on this, for me, a very cold and snowy evening. So this webinar officially launches a systems literacy collection on PBS LearningMedia, a collection of integrated media-based resources that at its core is designed and curated to help students better understand the nature of complex systems. Not necessarily a subject that we've addressed in school, but now becoming more in demand. So the nature of complex systems, their interrelationships, patterns, dynamics, and more. And through this collection, students will learn to see recurring patterns that exist among a wide variety of dynamic systems. They'll learn ways to make systems visible, and by doing so, they'll make their own thinking visible as well. And ultimately, the goal here is to use these concepts and tools to correct actions, anticipate unintended consequences, and produce better learning, decision-making, and design. So why are we so excited? I know I am. I think I've talked to a number of people about this collection, and I think it all comes down to this confluence of about 4 different threads or rivers that are coming together. One is the curriculum standards. I think many of you have heard of the next generation science standards and other Common Core, STEM, and particularly next gen standards are asking for thinking about systems. And then the systems tools and concepts themselves are very synergistic and supportive of other standards. And we'll go into that in a little bit, but the standards have come around, let's put it that way. The PBS LearningMedia platform itself is designed for integration, and it's designed so that we can pull, a resource from biology or history or science together to reveal the connections for students, so that they're really compartmentalization busters. You can really bring and integrate learning through this platform, which is just fantastic. And then the real benefits to students that are being documented and experienced by students both in the U.S. and around the world, and we'll talk about that. And then the other piece that I'm excited about, it seems to be really coming together too, is this growing field of dedicated systems educators. The field has been around now 20, 25 years. I think somebody could correct me, but in the U.S., integrating systems into schools, also internationally, standing on the shoulders of 75 plus years of systems science, out of the fields of biology, ecology, management, family systems. So this all been growing and coming together for quite some time now, and then combine all these together, and I'm excited. So let's just take a moment to look at the standards and just briefly about the next generation science standards. So that's NGSS here. You can see I've listed what's called a cross-cutting concept, and I have to say cross-cutting concepts are music to my ears because they're designed to give students K through 12 an organizing framework to connect knowledge across disciplines. So for the longest time, you have math in one class, science in another, English in another, and never the twain shall meet, right? But the cross-cutting concepts help students to look across the disciplines and give students a more interrelated knowledge of in this case sciences, but also other disciplines. So you can see here that I've highlighted one of these systems and systems modeling, and it rings. It's just right for the systems literacy because it focuses on students even recognizing that something's a system, understanding, specifying its boundaries, and making an explicit model. I should put it in quotes because making a model of a system can come in a variety of formats. It can be a simple diagram on a piece of paper all the way to a more complex computer model. There's also the Common Core standards and national STEM standards, and the systems concepts and tools support are synergistic with those standards as well. And at the end, I'm going to give you some links to show you some great work that some other organizations have done to align the systems tools with and concepts with those other standards. So I realize that we've got a really wide variety of people on this webinar, so I just want to make sure we're all on the same page because, what do we mean by system? What I mean by it is, your body, your family, relationships in a classroom, communities, oceans, governments, countries, the climate. These are all systems. They all involve different kinds of systems, often nested, connected to each other. And coming back to schools, just about every subject in school involves systems of one kind or another. So let me just pause here because I'm going to be talking at you a lot, and I want to make sure that we get a chance to talk to each other. But what of all the, just even the pictures you see on this page here, what do they have in common? If I said these were systems to you, just jot a couple of words in that chat box. What are some of the features of these quote systems you think that they share? Okay, let's see. I'm seeing a lot of multiple people trying to type. Okay, a change in any of these systems impacts us all. Great. Interrelationships, yep. Inside and out. So you could have a very rich conversation, and you can see that what seems very different actually has some similarities. So just for the sake of us coming together on the same page, let's say, and there's different definitions of systems, but a simple one, 2 or more parts that interact to form a whole, usually within some boundary, and usually to serve some purpose. So, your body is a great example. One way to think about, what's a system and what's not is to think about, there's a heap, a pile, a group, a stack, a pile of bricks, let's say. And then there's systems, and the systems have particular features, and that's one of the things we want our students to understand. So I'm going to show you a really quick piece of a video that's up on the PBS site right now, just so you can get a taste for it. And this is a video that tries to answer the question, what is systems? We had some fun with it. I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but I just want you to know that it's there so that you can, if you're in the position of needing to introduce the idea of systems, this could be a good way to do it. Okay.
Some people study rocks. Some people study medicine. Some people study French cooking. I study systems. A system has 2 or more parts that interact to form a whole. Systems are everywhere, from the smallest cell to your family, to the community, to the earth. These are all systems. And things in our everyday life are a part of systems. Let's take me as a...
Okay, we're not going to take me. So let's go back to the slides and get off of me. So that's there. It goes into this pretty funny little thing about, a heap. I brought my laundry in, and we looked at the difference between me and that pile of laundry. So it goes on, and it's actually, it's kind of fun. So you can take a look at that. So here's the thing, and systems that may seem wildly different share similar patterns of cause and effect relationships, share similar patterns of underlying behavior. So let me give you an example. I'm going to just say that again because for me, this is one of the things that has kept me going for all these years about systems, how interesting it is that wildly diverse, quote, systems like a thermostat in your house, homeostasis in your body, hunger and eating, predator-prey relationships, boom and bust cycles in the marketplace, the float valve in your toilet. These all share similar patterns of cause and effect relationships. So I just made this little diagram here. This is way oversimplified, but let's say you're talking about a thermostat, right? If you use it correctly, and there's been lots of studies that show that people actually use it more like a gas pedal, up and down, but if you use it correctly, you set it and leave it alone, right? You set it to a certain temperature. When you set it, if the temperature in the house is too cold, the furnace will kick in, right? The house temperature will go up. Over time, as it adjusts, it meets the temperature that was set, the furnace will go down. Over time, the house temperature might get a little cold. And so that if you look to the left, you see that the behavior of this particular set of relationships is sort of up and down. We might call that oscillating. So the same thing is that same self-regulation that's happening in a thermostat is happening when you shiver and when you sweat, homeostasis, hunger and eating, wolves and rabbits, or predator and prey, again, boom and bust, etc. So they're all driven by a closed set of cause and effect relationships called a feedback loop. In this case, it's called balancing or self-regulating. So what starts to happen when students recognize these patterns of behavior across the disciplines is they might see the rise and fall of an empire in history class and start to think, it's a change over time that's oscillating. Maybe there's balancing feedback underlying that. Or the boom in that starfish population and the disappearance of the sea otters in earth science class. So it can get pretty exciting. This is just one type of loop, but they can start to recognize these type of loops. Other phrases they might hear, I feel like a yo-yo, or it's going in fits and starts. That's more what you might hear in a social situation. So I don't want to leave you thinking that there's just one type. So the other type of building block, let's say, of systems is another type of feedback loop called reinforcing feedback, engines of growth and decline. And I'm going to use this example from my son, who is now 16. So this is when he was so little, and I was a brand new mom. He's I have 3, so he's the oldest. But I remember this very clearly still, he would eat his peas, and I would be very congratulatory, and then he would start throwing his peas, and he'd be very proud of himself and say, I did it. And then I would clap, and then he would eat his peas, and the whole thing would go over until the floor was a green mess. It took me a long time to figure out that if I stopped clapping, that some of this dynamic would change. But the point is that you can see that the behavior, compared to self-regulating and the balancing feedback, this one has a different behavior, right? It amplifies, and it can amplify in either growth or decline. So some of the other kind of examples of reinforcing feedback might be word of mouth or birth rate and population. You might hear phrases like, I'm on a roll, or it's out of control, or a snowball going downhill. In a class, a student might start sniffing around for reinforcing feedback back in the push of pioneers expanding west, or in health class, looking at the growth or the spread of a virus. So you can see how you can start to recognize some of these features of systems in everyday life and in subjects in school. So when we talk about this idea of being literate about systems, we're understanding feedback, and we're also understanding the features of systems, their interrelationships, that they change over time, that they accumulate, build up. That's another way we'll talk about stock and flows. That they have boundaries, with patterns of interaction, cause and effect. So these are some of the key words for systems literacy. There's also a set of reasoning skills, habits of mind, if you will. And there's many good lists of these habits of mind. But let's say these reasoning skills, that they recognize systems. They understand that systems act differently than their parts. So if I take the heart out of the body doesn't work on its own, and the heart doesn't work without the body doesn't work without the heart. So it's the interaction of the parts that produces something. They learn, that's part of the reasoning skills. They learn to recognize that. They learn to make systems visible, recognize similar patterns of behavior across disciplines, trace complex interrelationships, set situations in wider contexts, bump it out beyond, just looking at an event to what are the set of interrelationships that might be causing that event, and looking at different multiple levels of perspective. So, just to pause here before we jump into the collection itself, and Carolyn encouraged me to do this. What happens when we're not literate about systems? What happens when we don't try to see the whole? Well, there's a wonderful old tale, and I'm sure many of you know this story about the blind man and the elephant. I looked it up, and it has a lot of different origins, but definitely looks like India is one of the main sources. But it's a story about, in this case, blind men come upon an elephant, and they all are trying to figure out what it is. And one holds on to the trunk and says, "Oh, it's a hose," and the other one grabs onto the tail and says, "It's a rope," and another one puts their arms on the main body and says, "No, it's a rug," and they're all arguing from their perspective what this thing is. And that's they compare notes, and they realize that they only have their piece of the whole. They don't have the whole. And that's what I think a systems perspective can do, is to pull away from the part to see how the parts interrelate to produce something greater and something bigger. So before, I am going to take us on a tour now of the collection, and before I dive into that, I wanted to see if there are any questions. So if you have any questions, please type them into the box. I'll try to slow down. I'm trying to get us in within our hour time frame. Okay, I'm going to keep my eye in the box, and I'll pause as we go along. So I'm going to take us off to see this collection, but before I do that, I just want to say a big thank you to those who helped review this collection. Lee Stuntz, Sherry Marlin, Alan Tykotski, Kirk Bergstrom, Jeff Potash, Steve Roderick, and a special thanks to Tracy Benson and the team at the Waters Foundation for all of their support, and especially to George Richardson for being the big Papa Bear. And to my partner on this, Ted Sicker at PBS LearningMedia, for basically keeping me in line and really helping to make this what it is. So, okay, here we go. I'm going to take you, I'm looking for I don't see questions yet, so I'm going to take you off to here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so I'm assuming you can see this. Here we are. So the collection, what I wanted to just show you was that the first two resources here, this is a teaching about systems, is a module for teachers. Takes you all the way through the integration at different grade bands in K to 12. And then understanding dynamic systems, which is the second one, is for students, really for older students. Probably middle school could do it, but really meant for high school. And it gives them a chance at the end to really build their own model systems map, if you will, about something they care about. And then you have these two video resources, which are me talking about an intro to systems, but also here, I'm going to go like this, about causal loops. And then you have the mangroves, which is more for the littles, the K to 5, which I'll show you a little bit of that from a show called Plum Landing. One of the things I realized I might have skipped over is that the majority of the resources here are all PBS, WGBH resources that have been repurposed to teach about systems, as well as a wonderful resource from Nourish about healthy soil that came from World Link. But yeah, so here we are, kelp forests, healthy soils, and I'm going to take you into the healthy soils one, just to show you kind of how cool this platform really is, I guess. So you can see that right here is a video, and we're going to actually look at this from Michael Pollan. And then there's a set of support materials, background essay the students can read for the teachers, actual handouts, and then activities. And then this is the part I really love, is the ability to pull and integrate resources from the rest of the PBS LearningMedia site to support this, to support learning about soil in this case. Okay, so I'm going to go back, and just finally I wanted to show you that the other resources involve this really in-depth piece about climate, and I'm so sorry, I just realized that one of the major reviewers on this was an expert in the climate field, Beth Solin. So she was also one of our resource reviewers. So this is a terrific resource, and then also this great one on exponential growth, westward expansion, and at the bottom here we have 3 resources that are just supplemental to learn about drawing connection circles, causal loop diagrams, and stock and flows. Okay, so we're going to get us back now to the stop sharing. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to the slides, and I'll see if you've written any questions in there. Nope, I've still got Jack and his peas as my last one. So there's that's your tour, and if you have any questions, please just pop them in there, but take a look at this on your own. Now, what we're going to do now is I'm going to take you to a couple of the resources, and we'll do 3 resources. One for the littles again, K to 2, and we'll do one for middle school and one for high school. So let me give you a look at the Clem Marvels at the Mangrove, which is a resource I can show you right here. But the cross-cutting concept here for systems and systems modeling is that in grades K to 2, students will understand objects and organisms, and that they can be described in terms of their parts, and systems in the natural and design worlds have parts that work together. So here what we're trying to do is to have kids even think that something is a coherent whole, that it is a system. And so what they do is, in this case, they would watch this fun video and then look at how it might be a system or not, and then draw a connection circle to reveal some of those connections. So let me walk you through that somewhat quickly. So we're going to go to Plum Landing. And again, I'm not going to show you the whole video because you can go back and see that. I just want to give you a taste.
Welcome to Plum Landing! Plant marbles at a mangrove.
Pictures
I don't have enough pictures for this game I'm making.
Clem,
Could you possibly go back to Belize and take more pictures of a mangrove tree?
I love those trees.
I love those trees!
Okay, Plum,
I'm in the canopy and climbing down.
So there are branches.
And leaves. And a monkey.
And I remember you.
A quadamundee.
And those look like orchids. And birds. And a lizard.
And a
crab.
crab. Wow.
So many
Who knew
only place of animals who live in one tree.
Okay, so she then goes under the water, and she sees a lot more species, and then starts to talk about how they're connected. So you can see that just a fun, accessible resource for a young person to watch and start to think about systems. So what a teacher could do is to start asking them, just to walk through a systems checklist, if you will, to see, is this something that we could consider a system? And then they might draw a circle and ask the students to start, okay, what did you see in that video? And they start to label around the circle. I'll show you a picture of that. It obviously wouldn't look as like this necessarily, but start to label the different species, and then start to talk about how this is connected to that. And if you remember the feedback loops that we saw, eventually there'll probably be some closed loops in here where there's a predator and prey relationship that feeds back on itself. So that's a simple way that students in the K-2 could use some of these resources. And now let's move to 6 to 8. This is, again, the cross-cutting concept. Students can understand that systems may interact with other systems. They can use models to represent systems in their interactions. They can also learn that models are limited. So you can see we're getting more sophisticated. I had to include this picture here because I was in Iceland learning about healthy soil, which is what this is about. And it's like, why did I wear all white? For learning about tephra, I have no idea, but I just thought it was kind of funny. So anyway, let's go and take a look at this particular resource. Again, there's support materials, there's stock and flow, there's different ways to investigate increasing the amount of healthy soil. So what I'd like to do is just to show you the video from Michael Pollan, and the big point I have to just pause here to really emphasize is that this is a skill that we want to develop. A student watches this video, right? Watches any form of communication. Whether it's this video, they listen to a real discussion, they're listening to a conversation, they read a newspaper clipping, they watch the State of the Union address, they read text in a textbook. We want them to be able to make sense of why X is changing using some of these systems tools and whatever they're confronted with. So you'll see that a student will be able to watch this video, and the idea is that they would then be able to start to map what they heard using some of the systems tools, and then talk to their peers about their theory of change, if you will. So let me show you the video itself, and then I'll show you what that might look like. And this is Michael Pollan again. I think I'm going to show you the whole thing. This is from Nourish, because it's only about a minute long. And just one thing to notice is watch his hand movements here.
The last thing we think about when we're eating is the soil. We really do eat from the soil, and if the soil is healthy, the food will be healthy. And our food ends up back in the soil. I mean, this is a nutrient cycle that we're essentially interrupting by eating from it. So that the food grows in the soil, we eat the food, or the animal that ate the food, and then the waste products are composted and returned to the soil that way, in a healthy system. In our system, it seldom is returned to the soil, with the result that the soil is depleted, soil is unhealthy, and then the food that grows in that soil either needs lots of chemicals, or it too becomes unhealthy.
To be conscious of the
soil, and that eating is really connects you to the soil. It's a very foreign idea to most of us, but it's the basis of this engagement with nature that is eating.
Great. Okay, so I'm a student. I'm middle school. I mean, maybe in early high school. I'm watching that. I've learned how to use some of the tools of the mapping that I'm going to show you a little bit more of. I can listen to Michael Pollan, and I can put down my own sort of causal diagram of what he said, and I can share it with the person next to me. I can talk to somebody else and say, this is one of the ways that healthy soil grows. As I can do it not just in words, but I can do it visually, and I can, in the process of doing it visually, I can share my own thinking. I think that's one of the combinations that we're trying to get to. So I want to show you a couple of ways into thinking about healthy soil. In the student module, there's a tool called Arrange It, and it's a kind of nifty tool where you can drag these boxes on the left-hand side into a causal loop diagram. This is a causal loop diagram here, and try to make sense of a story that supports, or in this case matches, what they saw in the video. So it's a real scaffolding tool. Eventually, students will be creating the names of these variables on the left-hand side themselves. They'll be drawing the causal loop diagram themselves. But to kind of step into it, this is a good beginning. And you can see when we talk about how systems literacy can support basic skills, as a student has to articulate what's on the left-hand side here, the variables. You're going to have to create words that are that communicate to others. So there's a preciseness there that can build some vocabulary, can build literacy skills, among other things. So that's one. And then eventually, this is a much more complete diagram, but thinking about what increases healthy soil, what Michael Pollan said, and you can't see me waving my hands here, but I'm pointing to the decaying plants and animals at the top. He said that in a healthy system, those are included in a closed loop, which puts the nutrients and minerals back into the soil, helps to build soil health, increases growth of grass and plants, etc. Right? So you see that up on the left-hand side we see soil health. There's typically, it's always a really good idea to include a graph, because the key question you want a young person to ask is, what set of interrelationships is driving the behavior I see in that graph? So in this case, you see soil health growing. Well, what set of interrelationships would be driving that growth? And that's where you come eventually to something like this. And I see one of the questions has to do with, well, what if you leave a variable out, or what if you haven't had your boundaries not big enough? Well, absolutely. The challenge with putting up something like this is that in a classroom setting, this would be iterative. We would be talking about it, we would be changing, we'd be erasing, or we would be using Post-it notes in place of all these words so we can move them around. It's all a discussion trying to make our view of the world as close to the complexity as it is, but knowing that the map is always, not 100%, that we're trying to get closer to representing the complexity. Okay, so I think that's, and one other feature of the soil is that we also introduce the idea of stocks and flows, and essentially a stock is an accumulation, like a bathtub accumulating water. So you have, in the middle here, you have soil health, and the question to a student might be, what flows in to that bathtub of healthy soil, and meaning what's addition to a healthy soil, and what is subtraction, what flows out. And that generates a really good conversation and some more mapping. So I'm watching the time here, and we're good. I think I'd love to share this next one with you, which is around exponential growth.
Linda, excuse me, I want to interrupt you for a second. Hi. When you show the video clips, we're hearing the audio twice. I think if you mute your microphone or turn your volume way down, that will eliminate it.
Sure, I'll do that. Let's try that this time, okay? But right now, the voice is coming okay. It's when I show the clip, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Just the clips. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So here we are on the third band. This is high school. Now it gets a lot more comprehensive, more complex. The students can investigate or analyze a system by defining its boundaries an initial condition as well as inputs and outputs. They can use models and simulations to predict the behavior of a system and recognize that these predictions have a limited precision and reliability due to the assumptions and approximations inherent in the models. Okay, so there's another resource within this collection on climate that really is a great example, but I wanted to show this one to you because this boy is just a total crack up and perfect for this example. So this is from Cyber Chase, and it's an example of exponential growth. And in case, just to get us on the same page, actually I'm not going to tell you about exponential growth. I want to show you the video first, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about that afterwards and why it's a great systems concept. So here we go. I'm going to turn my volume down. You know, I got to turn the volume back up just to say to you that I'm not going to show you this whole thing, but it's a boy and his babysitter, and then I'll probably cut it off a little bit into that. Okay, here we go.
Stay right where you are. It's Cyber Chase for real.
I'm gonna beat you.
I don't think so.
How much you want to bet?
Don't you know gambling's wrong?
I bet you $5 I can beat you.
Let's pretend we're going to make a bet, which we're not, because then my mom would never let you babysit for me ever again. If you were really sure you were going to win, which would you bet? $5 or a bunch of pennies?
How big a bunch?
1 penny on this square, 2 pennies on the next, 4 here, 8 here. Keep doubling the number of pennies from square to square for the whole board.
Pennies or dollars? Of course I'd bet $5.
Well, let me tell you a story that may change your mind. It's the legend of the grain of rice. Once upon a time, there was a rotten king.
What do you want, you miserable peasant?
Even though you are a selfish tyrant who keeps all the kingdom's riches for yourself while the people have nothing to eat, I made this chessboard for you, your majesty.
Now I suppose you'll want a reward.
No, that's not necessary.
If I say you're getting a reward, you're getting a reward!
Whatever you wish.
Okay. So what'll it be? My autograph. A picture of me?
Simply give me some rice so that my family can eat.
Okay, I hope that that didn't reverberate too much, but I cut it off there. But basically, he sets him up and says, you know, if I give you, he puts one piece of rice on one, 2 on the next, 4 on the next, 8 on the next, and you can see that it's a process of doubling, which is a kind of reinforcing feedback, and eventually, you know, I can't even tell you the number, 18 quintillion 400, you know, he totally takes every, he robs the kingdom, basically. Why is this such a great example is that, you know, exponential growth shows up in all different subjects in school, in the spread of a rumor in a classroom or in the hallways, in economic growth, and the spread of a virus, and the arms race, and human population growth. So for students to be able to recognize that same feedback pattern across the disciplines is very empowering. One of the things I'm showing here on the right-hand side is that we, again, back to the graph, we show this graph which has this sort of hockey stick shape, and you might kids can and adults too, but recognize that that hockey stick is exponential growth, and what's the set of interrelationships that are driving that that shape. And one of the games that we have, or activities that we have in this collection, is a game adapted from a book I did called the Systems Thinking Playbook, and it's a paper fold, or you use a napkin and you see how many times you can fold it and have people guess what the thickness would be. And so it gets across the idea of exponential growth, and every time everybody's surprised at just the nature of exponential growth. So now I'm sort of wrap up. We've looked at those 3 resources. How would you talk to a young person about systems literacy? One way I think about it is, first we want to see systems. We just want to be able to recognize them. My CD collection, that's not really a system, but my family, and when mom's sick and on the couch, that's a family, that's a system. They recognize that things change. So recognizing system is one. Teaching about them, we have a checklist in the teacher module and in the student module for being able to hone in on if something's a system or not. And we also want to be able to make systems visible. We want all different ways. I'm showing you causal loop diagrams, there's stock and flow models, there's connection circles, there's all computer simulations, which we haven't covered in this. And the key is that as a young person starts to put pencil on paper or start to make these diagrams, that they share their thinking in the process. And a lot of times walking down the misconception path can be avoided as this thinking out loud and thinking visually happens. And the third part is the ability to talk about systems, to share, test, improve, to realize that there's assumptions that maybe I've drawn a boundary here that's too narrow, and that in the conversation with someone else I realize that, well, I need to make it broader, or I need to even make it smaller, or I've missed a variable, or there's a connection here that doesn't make sense and we should break that loop. All those things are important. And I think most important about the talking about systems is the ability to, for a young person going into a complex situation and being able to add some clarity because they have these tools, and having confidence to be able to do that. One of the shifts that I would want a young person to walk away with is to be suspect of a one-way view of reality, of linear. If somebody said, hey, wolves eat the rabbits, end of story, a young person who really understands system would say, no, there's more to that. The wolves eat the rabbits, rabbits eat the wolves, but, wolves eat the rabbits, rabbits population goes down, but over time the wolf population would go down. So they're always looking for what happens next. They're looking for closed loops where they exist. So finally, back to some of the benefits to students. I think learning about complex systems, students come to realize that nothing stands alone. They learn to look at their part of a system as they are interrelated with each other and with other systems. They can use this approach to understand complex phenomena in the classroom, in textbooks, and in everyday life. I think another benefit is they learn how to make systems and their thinking visible, and we've talked about that, and there's a whole host of tools for doing that. It accelerates the learning of some basic skills, skills like reading and writing, speaking and listening, precision of language, interdisciplinary learning. And at the end, I'm going to show you I mentioned the alignment with some Common Core standards that really highlight that. And then finally, improved communication skills. Students who are, you can see these students drawing this causal loop diagram here around a book called When the Leaf Blows In. They have to be clear about what each variable is. They have to agree amongst themselves. Often if they're doing a graph with this, they're going to have to say, well, what's the time frame this happens over? So they start to get they become even more precise. I think they become a little more courageous about offering an unconventional opinion. And they have their own, I think what's key too is they have their own personal library of patterns that they recognize, and that it can lead them to boldly suggest what might be going on in a situation, or in a classroom text, or even in a classroom setting. And I think they just generally have more confidence. So finally, what I'd like to do now is to share some of the folks that are out there really working long and hard to bring systems education into classrooms, into after-school settings. We've got the Creative Learning Exchange, which is has a clearinghouse of lots of resources, Waters Foundation, professional development, lots of resources to curriculum, training, long-term development in schools. You should really check out their site. Camp Snowball is a summer opportunity, July 13th through 17th, the Seoul Education Partnership for kind of a deep dive into systems education. I think the Echo Tipping Points is a great site for just good examples of applied systems. You can always look at my site. The Cloud Institute has a lot of systems thinking applied to sustainability, as well as the Center for Eco-Literacy in Berkeley. And then WorldLink has some great applied media-based resources around systems, particularly food systems. And then here are these links that I mentioned. Great work around alignment to the standards from the Waters Foundation, Creative Learning Exchange, and then another set here around the national STEM standards between systems education and these different standards. So here you go, Carolyn.
Okay, well, thank you, Linda. We'll keep our eye on the chat box. I want to give a very warm expression of gratitude to Linda for, first of all, participating as a advisor on this collection at WGBH, and then also it's been very informative and fun working with you, Linda, over the past couple of weeks on this presentation. I've learned a lot and about an area I never even knew existed. So thank you. Thank you very much. Before we put up the final poll, I'm very curious, related to the diversity of the group who registered for this webinar and the wide range of geography that you're coming from. I'd love to know how you heard about it. Was it through social media, through a colleague? Was it through an email from WGBH? But we're always interested in knowing where the impact in our marketing efforts comes from. So if you'd let us know that in the chat box, I would love that. Thank you. Okay, and then just a couple of final polling questions. I'll open these up right now. We'd like to know, you just get a little idea of how we did tonight, if this was helpful for you, and then how likely, if you are a teacher, how likely you are to use the materials with your students or with yourself. Okay. Great, thank you. All right, we're going back to the slides. This will just take a second. All right, as I had mentioned, I'm with WGBH, and GBH is a partner with PBS in the production of this service, PBS LearningMedia, where you will find 100,000 plus educational resources. And of course, part of that is the systems literacy collection. We cover K-12, all subject areas. You'll find a lot of resources that are largely drawn from major broadcasts like American Experience, Frontline, Between the Lines, Zoom, a lot of the programming for kids. So all subject areas and all grades, a site that is totally free. And we invite teachers, students, parents, anyone to log on and use the site and let us know what you think. Here are our social media outlets, and we invite you, of course, to follow and friend us. And We do a lot of traveling around. This year in particular, we're presenting and exhibiting at lots of statewide conferences throughout New England. Coming up soon is the MSLA conference in Amherst in March, and the MRA in Quincy in April. And then we'll be at the 2 national conferences, the Science Teachers Association in Chicago in March, and also the Math Teacher NCTM in Boston. That's their national conference is in Boston this year in April. And PBS LearningMedia will have a booth there. So if you're coming to any of those, let us know and stop by. Here is our contact information. Linda was going to put her Twitter handle in the chat box. We didn't get that on the slide right here. And again, I'm going to send out the recording link of the webinar tomorrow to everyone who registered, and it will also be posted on our social media sites. If you have an interest in the slides, let me know, and Linda and I will talk and see how we can make those available to you. Otherwise, it would be looking at the recording and then getting in touch with Linda if you have questions about system literacy, and if you have any questions about how to access the site or the collection, or comments about the collection, feel free to get in touch with me, Carolyn Jacobs. I want to thank everyone for coming. In particular, thank you to Linda Buswini, and we will keep the chat box open for another couple of minutes, and then we'll close out the room and wish you all a lovely rest of the evening and a wonderful weekend. And thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.